frost more limited, although it is a gloomy start for most, and it doesn't cheer up much into the afternoon. In fact, there's little change. There's still outbreaks of light rain and drizzle through some southern and western parts, and some more persistent rain coming into the northwest of Scotland by the end of the day because of a weather front that will be approaching from the Atlantic. Generally 5 to 7 degrees in the afternoon. That weather front crosses the country on Saturday as a weakening feature, and then we're back to showers coming in from the northwest, interspersed by sunny spells, and it will be a bright day across some eastern parts whilst we keep cloudier skies in the west. And later in the weekend, increasingly wet for Scotland, drier elsewhere, but milder across the board.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. The M1 is queuing on 2 stretches through West Yorkshire, both of which near Leeds and both of which caused by accidents. First of all, where the motorway is partly blocked northbound at junction 44 and it's slow southbound to 45 at the A63 following that collision that's now been cleared. On the M62 in Cheshire, the inside lane's closed westbound from junction 8 to 7 north of Warrington at the scene of an accident. The Essex stretch of the M25 remains shut anti-clockwise, junction 29 to 28 from the A127 round to the A12 for investigation work following an accident at noon. Long queues back through the Dartford tunnels into Kent and the other way back to the M11. And right on the Wiltshire-Berkshire border, the M4 is closed London-bound from junction 15 to 14, heading away from Swindon towards Hungerford after a lorry left a spillage of hydraulic fluid all over the motorway this morning.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
It's our festive treat to you. Your chance to win an incredible £50,000 in tax-free cash. Our biggest ever Great British giveaway. What would you spend £50,000 on in the coming year? Spectacular holidays, a brand new car, home improvements? Or maybe you'd just like to save it for a special occasion? For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good evening. The government are absolutely determined to build 1.5 million homes during the lifetime of this parliament, whatever local elected government thinks. What does it all mean for the Green Belt? And who are these houses actually for? The Ministry of Justice face a massive, terrible backlog in our whole judicial system, another one of the great benefits of locking us down 3 times. They're now looking at scrapping jury trials. Does that make sense, or would it weaken things that we value, liberties that we've really thought to be integral to our way of life for centuries? And Kemi Badenoch says that lunch breaks are for wimps. I will give you a full, definitive Farage answer to what I think about that. First, let's get the news with Will Hollis.
Thank you, Nigel. Some breaking news for you at the top of Nigel's show. The government will not change the terrorist status of the rebel group which toppled the Syrian regime. Defence Secretary John Healey says the government is laser-focused on stopping a resurgence of terror groups like ISIS in the Middle East, but won't remove HTS from the rebels who removed Assad from power from the proscribed terror list.
Conscription is not a matter for now. It doesn't stop us talking to all the parties, and our interest in HTS is that they live up to their promises to protect the rights of all individuals and all groups, to respect international law, and to prevent Syria becoming a base for fresh terrorist threats.
A body has been found in the search for missing former England rugby player Tom Voice. It's feared the 43-year-old was swept away while trying to cross a flooded river on Saturday night during Storm Dara. It's believed Mr. Voice had entered the river Alnwick after attempting to cross Aberwick Ford in his car. Northumbria's police's marine unit discovered a body earlier today. Chief Superintendent Helena Barron said the development was extremely sad. The government is today demanding immediate mandatory housing targets from councils as part of its plan to build 1.5 million houses by the next general election. Sir Keir Starmer is vowing to override blockers and put builders first as he prepares to unveil sweeping changes to the planning process. The new plans could mean increased developments on the Greenbelt, though the government has pledged to prioritise brownfield sites. A man who tried to set fire to a hotel housing asylum seekers has been jailed for 9 years. That's the joint longest prison sentence in connection with the UK's summer of riots. Levi Fishlock smashed windows and stoked a flaming bin at the Holiday Inn Express in Rotherham during a spate of disorder on the 4th of August. The 31-year-old initially denied violent disorder and arson with intent to endanger life, but later pleaded guilty to the charges. Fishlock's sentence includes a 5-year licence period after he's released from jail. And your final story for now, drivers planning Christmas getaways are being warned to expect long queues because of record traffic levels. The AA predicted that Friday, December the 20th will be the busiest day on the roads during the festive period, with an estimated 23.7 million drivers planning a trip. That's more than the busiest Christmas getaway day of any year since the AA began recording data in 2010. The joint second worst day of traffic jams over the 2024 festive period are expected to be December the 21st and December the 23rd, each with more than 22 million drivers on the road. The amber traffic warnings have been issued by the AA for all 3 days. Those are your latest stories for now. It is back to Nigel.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. Well, in common with the last government, there is a target to build 1.5 million homes during the lifetime of this Parliament. It's just that Labour seem to be rather more determined to do it because they are quite prepared to totally override local district, county councils, local unitary authorities. They are just going to do it. And this includes redefinitions of what counts as green belt land. Some of it potentially being designated as being grey belt. Now, if this comes to disused garages or empty car parks or vacant pubs, well, you might say that all makes sense. But there will be, especially across the home counties, real, genuine worry about what it means for green spaces, about what it means for gaps in between villages. And by the way, when all these houses get built, there'll be no more GPs, no more school places, no more roads, no, your quality of life will diminish directly as a result of this. Now, whether they can actually meet the target, I very much doubt. without importing huge amounts of foreign labour, which, of course, in turn will mean even more demand for houses. Right now, we have to provide one new home every 2 minutes just to keep pace with levels of immigration in this country. So the truth of it is, we must build over greenbelt land all over our nation just to house those that have come into this country in the course of the last 10 years. However, we have a serious housing shortage. What are we to do? I'm joined by Kane Emerson, Head of Housing Research at an outfit called YIMBY. Not NIMBY, YIMBY, which I guess, Kane, means you're quite in favour of house building everywhere.
Yeah, yes, in my backyard.
So forget the green belt, forget historic England, just build everywhere.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily build absolutely everywhere. You know, the announcements today aren't a kind of a way to concrete over the countryside. We know that the green belt only represents about 10% of the countryside.
So why not protect it?
Yes, well, under the plans today, hopefully we get much more high-quality countryside protected. So this Labour government has announced plans that they're going to designate some of the green belt into grey belt. So that's areas such as, you know, rubbish dumps, old garages, disused land.
So if it's literally just that, I don't think there'll be a problem. But will it stay at that?
Well, it may involve some greenbelt development, but at a sustainable location. So greenbelt, particularly in the southeast, councils can no longer use having greenbelt as a bit of excuse for not developing any new homes.
All right, I'm also joined in the studio by Kwasi Kwarteng, former Chancellor, and Matthew Torbett, former Labour Party advisor. Just to quickly cut in with you guys before I come back to Kane here. Kwasi, basically, you filled the country up with millions of people. The impact is we just have to build loads of houses.
So this has been an issue for 25 years.
But much worse in the last 14.
I'd say no, actually, I'd say it's been...
Well, look at the numbers.
Well, look, not just the immigration
numbers. You let far more people in than anybody else
we might have done, but the issue
is... live somewhere.
The issue is the house building, and we haven't been house building. That's the issue. That's the issue. So it's not just about...
How could you... When you were projecting for tens of thousands a year net to build, how could you build houses for millions?
So that was an issue. But, of course, you will remember that when we had lots of immigration from the EU in the noughties under Tony Blair, that was an issue as well. And what's happened is, whether we like it or not, and I know you've campaigned, you've spent your whole life, professional life, political life, campaigning against this.
Warning people about this would happen.
But look, so the population when we were growing up, 55 million, that was the figure that we all learned, you know, growing up. The population now is probably about 70 million. I mean, officially it might be 67, but actually in reality it's 70 million. So you've got a 15 million increase, and people who are better than me at maths. Not just because of us. It's happened over the last 25 years. You could blame the
pace of it. The pace of it has been higher in the last 3 years than it's ever been in our history, and 3 times what it was under Tony Blair.
So the reality is, looking forward, and it's happened something, you know, that's happened in the last 20 years. We need to build more houses. And it's not just about immigration, it's about people... Yeah, because also the way...
5 out of every 7 new houses will go to immigrants.
No, but listen, I mean, it's not... That's, I think, a bit too simplistic. If you look at how people live... Now, if you look at how people live, Nigel, back in the day, there were family units. People lived, generally, you know, the 2.4 kids. You remember that statistic?
Yeah.
That was a family unit. Now... people live as individuals. They're people getting married later, they want to have individual lifestyles, and they live as single people. That's an issue.
No, there is
in terms of the
there is some truth in that.
That's right. And so in terms of, it's not just the immigration issue, there's a lifestyle issue as well, which means, added together, that we need more housing.
Matthew, do you think Labour can actually meet these targets? Is it actually, I mean, ignoring for a minute the arguments about greenbelt and desirability, is it even possible?
Probably not. But I don't think there's any harm in having a target.
That's right.
I think the worst case you can go, well, we still built you know, hundreds of thousands more than the last lot. That's why you should trust us to finish the job in another 5 years potentially. I think I'd probably fall on Kane's side of things. I think for me, we have a housing and homelessness crisis. We don't have a countryside crisis. And I think the one startling stat for me, it isn't going to please councils that they're going to be overrun. It doesn't sound nice. It's going to leave a bit of a bitter taste in their mouth. But when we have more area of land in this country dedicated to golf courses, which is 2% of the land in this country, and we have 1.1% of land in this country built on for houses, we're not overrun. What I would say with regards to points like yours is that we have areas that are densely populated. I agree. So actually, maybe that makes the argument even easier for people like Kane, because we do need to spread people out more. Maybe that needs some grey and a little bit of greenbelt giving way.
What we don't quite know, I mean, obviously there is the plan, and each council's told what it must build and what it must do. The emphasis is very much south of Birmingham, and to the east of Swindon. I mean, it is the home counties.
Yeah, that's
right.
And I made some points earlier that are very valid points. People's quality of life has diminished in the last 20 years. Traffic's a blooming nightmare. GP access is virtually impossible. Quite a lot of 4.5, 5-year-old primary kids travelling 20 miles to find schools. And that's my worry with all of these plans. And I've looked, by the way, at the local plan in my own constituency and studied what is being demanded. And there's no provision for services. It's just building houses. That is a huge problem.
Yeah, so first of all, congratulations that your local authority has a local plan. Many local authorities don't. And a part of the announcement today is putting an emphasis on local plans so communities can come up with a plan of how they want their area to look like. So re-emphasising the importance of local plans so people are empowered to consider what their area is going to look like. But yes, it really is quite focused on the southeast and London, and that's quite welcome. So initially in the consultation...
Why is it welcome?
It's welcome because if you're a government thinking about growth, the best way you can think about growth is by enabling development where currently the prices are the most unaffordable for working people.
I get that. Look, I'm sympathetic.
That's a fair point.
I'm sympathetic to a lot of what you're doing. And we've got to remember, I mean, you weren't in Parliament at the time, but when we were in the Conservative government between 2020 and 2024, we constantly tried to get the dial moving on house building. You know, we had commitments, and for whatever reason, we couldn't get the majorities we needed in Parliament. And by the fact that we got them, when we got the majority in 2019, you know, there was a whole other world of...
But even if you'd met the targets, Kwasi, you wouldn't have kept up with net migration.
No, so we had to do both. You've got to do both things. You've got to try and build...
I wonder whether there's a rethink needed on this. If you look at other European cities, neighbouring cities, perhaps even American cities, if you look at how we live in London, you know, a huge number of people live in basically two-storey buildings. I think we have the lowest level of height density for any equivalent building in a capital in the country. And we could apply the same arguments. By the way, I'm not talking ghastly, great big 28-floor tower blocks. I'm talking, you know, Paris. Most houses in Paris are 5-storey buildings. Isn't there an argument for building more buildings up than building out?
I couldn't agree more about building up, but the reality is that we are at a crisis point, and today is a major reset of what planning aims to do, and that is, at the moment, channeling local authorities to thinking about national growth that this Labour government have as a mission. But on other cities, so for example, Paris, where you often have 6-storey buildings, Paris has tripled in size since 1945. London has grown only 2 or 3% its outward boundaries. So we do need to do both because we are in a housing crisis. And particularly, you know, your viewers in the southeast of England or in London, housing is so unaffordable for the average person, for working class people.
And in particular, Matthew, I mean, the people that are most frustrated by this are the under-30s.
Totally.
For whom in London and the South East getting on the ladder is just a nightmare. Impossible.
If my mum and dad don't pay off their mortgage and manage to leave me and my 3 siblings a little something at the end, I don't know how I'll do it, put it that way. I wrote it off years ago and just thought it's pointless.
You don't think you could even think about owning a property?
I don't think so. Not in this class. Certainly not in London. Now, could I move back to Manchester and Stockport? Maybe, but even there's pressures there because people are moving out of city centres to the boroughs and whatnot. And I think I sort of have a little bit of sympathy with what you say because I think to help Kwasi a little bit as well, it's successive governments who haven't trained our own people. We've allowed people to use things like the apprenticeship.
The skills shortage.
Yeah, 1,000,000%.
Of bricklayers, of carpenters, of plumbers. I mean, we may need to meet these targets to import literally tens of thousands of people from around the rest of the world. I agree with you on that. But how could we possibly plan for what housing we'd need when net migration numbers run at multiples?
I agree. Look, you remember, I talked about the 55 million. In the 1990s, there was very little population growth. There was very stable population. When we went into when we expanded the EU effectively, that triggered 2003, 2004, huge amounts of migration, up to 1 million a year people were coming in.
Net about 250,000.
250,000, but
not 1 million like under you.
No, but it was very high.
You've got to stop playing these games, and you've got to own up to the fact that actually you guys increased net migration on a level that was quadruple what it was in Blair's time.
I don't think that's quite right.
Well, factually, it's right.
But the issue was this massive expansive. We can look.
We are where we are.
We are where we are.
We have a massive housing shortage. If net migration continues at current rates, then actually even what we're building is futile. So I think we need to do both.
Yes, so you're right.
We need to do both. I do think that for young people it is a complete nightmare. Here's the question, and it's perhaps, Kane, a tough question to ask you. But if we say we meet these housing targets, do you think there's any realistic prospect of house prices coming down?
I don't think there's any realistic prospect of house prices coming down in the short or medium term, or even long term, really. It's near impossible. You're going to have to build millions upon millions of new homes. However, the ambition should be to stabilise prices.
Exactly.
So in cities across the world where you have good housing supply, you actually have a lot less volatile housing market. So prices don't go up enormously, but they also don't come down.
I think Kane's point is right. It's not about them actually fall. They're not going to fall. No. But it's the rate of increase.
It's the rate of increase that you have to say, it is the young that have paid the price for this more than anybody else. There are quite a lot of people who are moving into pensioners who've sold houses in London and
they've done very
gone
well.
to live in the country and done very well. It's an issue we'll come back to again and again and again. Just one point. I've made 2 shout-outs for Maidstone next Thursday, a live Farage at Large show. Please don't apply for tickets. 500 of you have already bought them. We're full. We're done. Which I'm very pleased about. Now, in a minute, should we scrap juries, or would that be a really catastrophic thing to do to perhaps what has been the most trusted judicial system in the world ever since the days of Magna Carta?
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Dora Carrington is not known to lots of people, and very few pieces are in public collections. So you have had a great deal of work to do to put this exhibition together.
Absolutely. It's been, next year, it will be 30 years since the last major exhibition of Carrington's work, which happened in 1995 at the Barbican Gallery. And I guess if people know Carrington's work, they might have seen the film that took place that year, that came out that year, starring Emma Thompson as Carrington and Jonathan Pryce as Lytton Strachey, who was her main kind of key relationship in her life. And that, in a way, dramatised a lot of those relationships. And so people will often know her life as much as her art. There's only 16 works in public collections, and so apart from chances such as the big billboard campaign you mentioned 10 years ago, there have been very few chances to actually see her work in the flesh. And so what this exhibition does is bring together around 80 works by Carrington and a few of her key contemporaries, providing a new generation really a chance to see and enjoy her work. She was one of the most remarkable of her generation at the Slade School of Art. She won several prizes for her drawing and her draftsmanship. And in the first room of the exhibition, we have some of the work, for example, a couple of female nudes that she painted when she was at the Slade, and they really are kind of quite outstanding.
One of the things that's been said is that in her landscapes, she's sometimes painting the human body as well as the landscape. Is that something that occurred to you? Can you stand up that?
Yes, I mean, one of her most famous paintings we have of Spain has. It's very much like you could liken it to the female form. You know, the kind of the
delicately put.
Yes.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Nightmare commute.
kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I've said it before, I'll say it again. Those successive lockdowns we went through were the greatest mistake ever made by government in peacetime Britain. And because of the lunacy of those extended lockdowns, one of the knock-ons, and we haven't talked about this much, has been the knock-on to our judicial system. And we face a situation now where cases are waiting to go to Crown Court and elsewhere are up by way over 100% than they were 5 years ago. There is a massive crisis, and that has led, and these are voices that we've heard before, but they're getting a little bit more serious, to the new concept of intermediate courts, which means there'd be a judge, there'd be, perhaps a couple of local representatives from the community, they'd have some legal qualification of some kind, they might be magistrates for all we know, but there would not be your jury of 12 good men and women and true, which I think has been one of the essential safeguards that we've had in this country. I worry too that if you start to move away from jury trial, you also start to move towards plea bargaining. And believe you me, I've seen in America what plea bargaining does. 98% of cases in America result in a guilty plea because you're basically told, unless you plead guilty, you'll go to prison for 100 years. I'm worried about this. I do think, with all its imperfections, but I do think jury trial basically works. I'm joined in the studio with Philip Taylor, barrister with Richmond Green Chambers. Philip, the backlogs are scary, aren't they?
They are. 63,000, I believe, is about the number in the Crown Court. We're talking about listings now for 2027. It's not acceptable. And to blame individual people or groups is not actually the answer. The problem is much deeper than that. I believe the biggest problem is the fact that we do not have enough judicial sitting time, and I support Baroness Carr, the Lady Chief Justice, in her request to the Treasury to open it up so that we can actually have more courts open and more people actually being tried much more quickly. The worst problem is for people who are facing serious offences, where, especially rape, where in fact the memory goes after a while. So you need to get on and hear these cases quickly.
And these intermediate courts, I mean, I just worry that a watering down of the jury system perhaps takes us towards a judiciary which moves, as I said in my talk-in, towards plea bargaining. Let's just find this person guilty and move on.
Well, of course, it's totally unacceptable to have what we call plea bargaining in the English legal system. We do occasionally discuss what type of possible prosecution there might be in the criminal courts, but there is a certain amount of discussion to narrow issues about what you're facing. The reality, though, of course, is that if you have a concept like an intermediate court, which, say, has a circuit judge and two magistrates, which is a bit like the appeal process from the magistrates' court, that is fine to a certain extent. I've done, like many other people, many of those cases. I don't believe that's right. We must keep the jury trials. I've been very fortunate, as a barrister, to actually be a juror. I've actually sat on the jury, and I've seen it from that end as well. And I believe very strongly in keeping it. The real issue, though, is let's get our courts back working properly. You were right to say COVID was one of the problems, but that's a while ago. And it's, we haven't got to deal with it.
We haven't caught up at all.
No, it's got worse. And my view is that the people who are responsible for this, no disrespect to Kwasi, but the people who are responsible effectively are the government. Now, we've got the government of the day, which is Labour. Let's have Miss Mahmood, as Secretary of State for Justice, going and visiting some of the courts incognito, the way Michael Gove did. So they're not shown all the things that they want to be shown. But you can actually see the real thing when you go in and find the courts are empty and there's very little going on.
Matthew, there's no question that, on a number of levels, this has been a difficult inheritance for the Labour Party. But this problem we're looking at here is very real, isn't it?
Of course it is, and I don't envy the government for a lot of what they've got to deal with. We've seen with the prison announcement this week, it felt like papering over the cracks to me, but it's almost like you've got to solve that end before you get to the courts. I used to question why we don't have things like Nightingale courts. Keir Starmer, when he was DPP, was very keen after the 2011 riots to have courts sitting all hours God sends to make an example of people. But I was told by a former inspectorate of the prison system from 2010 to 2016 that the reason why we can't do that is you end up with a load of people going through the system at once and you haven't got the places at the end to put them. So you've almost got to fix the prison places before you get to the courts.
You mean that way round.
Exactly. So there's a whole system here. It's not just about putting people through the justice. It's that once and if they're convicted, you need often a prison place to keep them. And if you don't have enough prison places, then the whole thing.
And Kwasi, my thoughts on jury trial. Am I an outdated romantic on this?
So look, I think you've got an absolutist view because already, we've got magistrate courts. There's certain fraud trials where we don't have.
Depending on the severity.
And also, technology moves on. I remember the old days we used to talk about double jeopardy. And once you were tried, that was it. And of course, that came from King John, where he would keep trying to try people again and again and again.
Well, I wasn't in favour of that logic personally, but
and we stopped that because technology moved on. We had DNA testing, we had all sorts of things. So there are things in the legal system that evolve over time. It doesn't have to just because it worked in 1300 or 1500 doesn't mean we have to just stick at it or to it forever.
Well, that's a fair point, Philip. What do you think needs to be done?
Well, I think the first thing to do is I actually had sat as a juror in a Nightingale court. They worked very well indeed. I think Robert Buckland and the others must be congratulated, and it's still there. I do want to see them expanded. I would like to see night courts and weekend courts. And I don't buy the argument that there are no lawyers to hear these cases. And I would actually bring judges out of retirement, as we have done now certainly in the family and the civil division.
I agree with that. I think, do we all agree with Philip there? That's a very good idea.
Yeah, I think also we currently have almost like plea bargains at the moment. There's become a loophole. With regards to the fact that... let me finish. You're all happy to disagree. We currently have such a backlog of prisoners on remand that they're changing their pleas at the very last moment because they'll get out on time served rather than getting longer by being not guilty. So they will change to guilty because they're out straight away.
There are elements of it. I accept that. I'd rather not see it go any further. Thank you very much indeed for coming and joining us. Now, it is the Advent season, and we have today's little Advent message for you.
The GB News Advent Calendar, Day 12.
Hello, my name is Marjorie, and I'm a minister in the north of England. Advent is a season of hopeful waiting, anticipation and preparation. I wonder what you are hoping for this Christmas. As we watch the news across our world, it can be hard not to feel hopeless. Who can fix the state of our world today? Hundreds of years beforehand, speaking of the birth of Jesus Christ, the prophet Isaiah said this: "He will swallow up death in victory, and the Lord God will wipe away tears from all of their faces." We live this side of history with the incredible reality of the fulfillment of this prophecy in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. If Advent is about looking back with wonder, it is also about looking forward to the return of Jesus Christ. And so we continue to wait. And we are all too aware that this will be the prayer of many people. There is sickness and suffering and sadness, that one day He will wipe every tear from their face. But at this Advent time, we know the end of the story. The message of Jesus Christ is just this, that He is strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow.
In a moment, we're going to come back after the break and ask, how is it, after a 15% pay rise, the train drivers are refusing to work overtime over Christmas? Are we moving into a period where the unions have the whip hand over government?
Hi there. The weather is turning increasingly gloomy across the UK with a lot of cloud, some mist, hill fog and drizzle. There will be a few clearer spots over the next 24 hours, mostly central and northern parts of mainland Scotland, but a number of cloud breaks are possible elsewhere, particularly western parts of the country. But otherwise, it's just an extensive sheet of low cloud that will cover the hills and bring misty conditions with, in places, some light rain and drizzle, especially for western Scotland and through some southern and eastern parts of England and Wales. Temperatures then holding up under that blanket of cloud, 5 or 6 Celsius by dawn in many places, although under some clearer spells across parts of Scotland, dipping to -3 to -6 degrees. Frost-free, generally speaking, across southern areas, although a few cloud breaks possible towards the southwest, and where that happens, temperatures will dip to 1 or 2 Celsius. Likewise for Northern Ireland, some brighter spells to begin the day, away from those areas where we're covered by a lot of low cloud, mist, hill fog and drizzle. The clearest spot there for northeast mainland Scotland, but otherwise Scotland certainly cloudier compared with recent mornings, and as a result, the frost more limited, although it is a gloomy start for most, and it doesn't cheer up much into the afternoon. In fact, there's little change. There's still outbreaks of light rain and drizzle through some southern and western parts, and some more persistent rain coming into the northwest of Scotland by the end of the day because of a weather front that will be approaching from the Atlantic. Generally 5 to 7 degrees in the afternoon. That weather front crosses the country on Saturday as a weakening feature, and then we're back to showers coming in from the northwest, interspersed by sunny spells, and it will be a bright day across some eastern parts whilst we keep cloudier skies in the west. And later in the weekend, increasingly wet for Scotland, drier elsewhere, but milder across the board.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date. Or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've heard so much about that £22 billion black hole that was left by the Conservatives, but actually you could argue that nearly half of the black hole has been caused by this government giving astonishing pay rises to people like train drivers, a 15% package. But that's not enough for Aslif and the others. Oh, no, 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 no. They have no intention over Christmas to work overtime. So happy are they with their pay rises, which probably means for millions of people who want to avoid our horrendously crowded motorways, that it's going to be jolly, jolly difficult. And I just wonder, is this one of the first inklings that if you give the trade union movement what they want, far from being satisfied, they come back for more and more? Is this one of those issues over the next year or two that's going to give the Labour government a huge nightmare, a 1970s style nightmare, quasi-Kwarteng? This could be a problem for them.
I think it's a huge problem. And actually, at the time, I was very surprised that the first thing they did, pretty much, when they won on the 4th of July, was to do a deal with the unions. And it wasn't just the train drivers. No. They did deals across the public sector, which people like me were saying, well, this is just a green light for whichever union, whatever job you're in the public sector. Why wouldn't you ask for more? You can see that the train drivers are getting 5% a year for 3 years. Yep. Inflation's at 2%. So you'd almost be mad not to strike and flex your muscles if you could see that, the train drivers were getting the deal. And they said, the Labour government said, oh, well, no, we had to do the deal with the unions because to prevent strikes. That was one of the reasons why do you remember that? They said, we're doing it because actually we're going to lose a lot more money if they strike. So we might as well give them what they want so that they don't strike. But clearly this has happened, and what you've done is you've given them money and now they want more.
Well,
which is entirely rational from their point of view. It's an entirely rational response.
The problem, Matthew, with this, that these pay deals that were agreed to didn't have any productivity clauses. Do you see what I mean? I.e., the taxpayer would say, well, this is going to cost us more money, but if we're going to get increased productivity, maybe it's worth it. They didn't do any of that.
No, but then I suppose that's partly because we have a Victorian standard railway. You know, and things like HS2 get pushed into the long grass. Is it going to stop at Euston? Is it not? I think also it's a point worth making that actually this isn't a strike. This is totally optional, and whether people like it or not, if you're asked whether to do overtime and you don't want to do it over Christmas,
I've got loads more money, I'll stay at home at Christmas with the kids.
That's part of what it is. It's not asking for more. They've got a bit of a bumper pay rise, which if I'm really going to pick hairs, I think inflation added together from then till now 21%. They've took a 3% pay cut in real terms.
Over how long? I mean, you'll say...
We're going back to
but we all had to...
What I would say is, these private companies, whilst they still are private, they say the reason is they haven't got enough train drivers. Well, some of those mentioned in the article cited, Avanti made 30 million quid in profit last year, Great Western Railway made £220 million, Chiltern 250 and Thameslink made 14 million. You're telling me you can't afford to employ a few more drivers to ensure you've got trains that can run, regardless of overtime.
That's a fair point.
I think that's...
But the idea of companies is to make profit. I mean, they're not...
And those that have to raise private capital have to return...
Exactly, and they've got investors
But more broadly, outside... I mean, you know, Kwasi made the point, it wasn't just train drivers. Across the public sector, there were, you know, pretty big pay increases and pay deals. As I said earlier, without any productivity guarantees. The point I was making is it seems the more you give unions, particularly when Labour are in power, the more they want. Is this potentially going to be a problem for the government?
It could be. I think it's also an argument to maybe join a good trade union. If you've got a strong trade union, you might get something you want.
Look, from their point of view, I think it makes sense. But from a national point of view, it doesn't make sense.
No, I agree. Listen, I travel on the trains all the time. There's nothing more miserable at the moment than getting on a train if you can get on one that's not packed. But on the flip side, this is electoral politics. I thought at the time the reason why people are getting pay rises is, one, yes, there's an excuse that the junior doctors and others go back to work and we've stopped the strikes, the Tories couldn't do it.
Yeah, that's
but at the same time, who's Labour's biggest voter base? Public sector
and they're
workers.
donors. And they're it's pure policy.
Well, no, I thought the budget, I thought the agreements in the budget were very much, you're our voters, we're going to look after you, stuff the pensioners and private business.
See, but the problem was,
pretty cynical stuff.
Yeah, but they alienated everybody.
I'm working in politics.
But it's self-defeating, because what's going to happen, I mean, this is particularly the case with the national insurance rise on employers, is that guess what? The employers will hire fewer people and they'll pay the ones they've got less.
Yeah, but again, I am not in no way anti-profit. I'm all for people making money. I've got no issue with millionaires.
You're not a communist, basically.
No, I'm not a communist. However, the big businesses that have been coming out saying that have made billions or hundreds of millions of pounds profit. A lot of the big supermarkets...
That's not an unfair... That's
they made a right trade during COVID as well.
So as Winston Churchill said, you know, we've got to encourage companies to make profit.
Absolutely.
And the ones that make losses, that's the problem.
But if the shareholders have got to have the Tesco own brand turkey this winter rather than the M&S one, my heart isn't going to bleed for them.
Okay.
You know?
But the issue is, and I don't know where your view is on this, you know, I hear people...
Test me, you'll find out.
They want to nationalise the railways. And I'm old enough, and Nigel's certainly old enough to remember the old British... Well, you're old. Just by logic, you're older than me. So you definitely remember.
British Rail was horrific.
It was terrible. Horrific. It was terrible. It was terrible.
Horrific.
It was absolutely terrible.
Enough on railways and pay. Again, a subject we'll return to. The What the Farage moment is the leader of His Majesty's Opposition, Kemi Badenoch. Now, one of the things she's been accused of is not working hard enough. So, in this interview with the Specky, she says, lunch is for wimps. That's going back to the Wall Street film of the 1980s. I have food brought in and I work and eat at the same time. There's no time sometimes. I will get a steak. I'm not a sandwich person. I don't think sandwiches are a real food. It's what you have for breakfast. I'm beginning to lose the plot here. Well, anyway, I literally couldn't help it because I thought I might respond at lunchtime today to lunch is for wimps. This was me at about 3 o'clock this afternoon.
The leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition, Kemi Badenoch, says that lunch is for wimps. Well, I tell you what, I think that lunch is pretty cool. But on the busy days, I stay in the office and have a sandwich. She even thinks sandwiches are wrong. Now, I leave it up to you, centre-right voters, to decide what kind of leadership you want. Lunch is for wimps or me? Cheers, everybody.
Well, I couldn't resist it, but the idea that sandwiches aren't a thing we have at lunch, I think everybody from school kids to people going out for the day, to people working at their desk, to people heading off to the building site. We all have sandwiches for lunch. Yeah, of course. Kemi, how do you have a steak brought in?
Kemi is
How do you have a steak brought in?
I don't know.
How does that work?
She's got people around her.
I've never heard anything like it.
Look, but
is there a takeaway steak service I've never heard of?
It was light-hearted. I think people are getting slightly overexcited about it.
Didn't it show how disconnected she is?
No, because the problem is, the one complaint about politicians, they're not real people. They don't say what they think.
Real people have sandwiches.
They don't say what they think. Well, she says what she thinks. Yeah. She says what she thinks. To her and to a lot of people. I mean, I'm trying to do a low-carb diet and all of that. Okay. We don't eat sandwiches. Back in the day, as I'm sure you were in the city, we used to eat sandwiches the whole time. If you didn't have a big boozy lunch. I mean, but look, it was slightly light-hearted. It was an article in the Spectator, and I think people are taking.
She's not really connecting, is she?
No, look, I think she's a very capable politician. I think it'll take time, but I think she's doing human. I mean, the one criticism of politicians that I heard, and you've probably heard it, and I think that's part of your success, is that you're actually a human being who can relate to people, and you say your views, and that's what she's doing. Now, you can say, oh, those views don't relate to people, but, we've had, automatons who just say the same thing, they say the party line, and she's much more of an individual than that.
Is lunch for wimps, Matthew?
I hope not, otherwise that makes me a real big wimp. I've not been called that for many years. I thought she, if she's human, it's human. I thought she sounded a bit weird, really. I just thought, if I could be blunt, she's a bit of a weirdo, and I just think it came across as a bit abnormal. How do you eat a steak whilst...
How does
you have steaks for lunch? I mean,
they'd be freezing blooming cold or overdone. She doesn't have steak for lunch at her desk. It's complete and utter nonsense, and she's completely disconnected. And there we are, Kwasi's wrong. But we're used to that. And that's the end of the segment. In a moment, we'll discuss the Met Police. The staff are threatening to strike over work-from-home arrangements. We'll come to that in just a sec.
I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
The way in which children are being driven online because we're not taking them seriously offline. And what we're tending to do is seeing the problems entirely on the social media, forgetting the fact that we've given up on children being able to work independently and play independently outdoors. We've basically created a world where the digital bedroom has become this go-to area for a lot of young kids. We've given up on old-fashioned parenting, where we try to cultivate their resilience. And now we blame everything, all the problems that occur online. You have to remember that if you take something like bullying, bullying, doesn't have to only take place online. It happens all the time, offline, in everyday life. But yet we only see the problem on the social media, and there's this obsession with the social media where every single problem that afflicts childhood is blamed on it. And that distracts us from actually understanding what we're doing wrong with children. So for me, and I hate when I see children with digital technology, when I see them with smartphones. I'm not a fan. I'm much more concerned about the fact that parents, use their digital phones when they're having dinner with their kids and giving very bad examples in relation to that. But the real problem, it seems to me, is offline, and that's why we got to crack the issue. So for me, the banning issue is entirely a headline-grabbing political gambit. And I think that we should be much more focused on the real problems rather than delude ourselves that anything will improve.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akua, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop star to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
For the first time in 150 years, the Metropolitan Police, at least a segment of them, are threatening to go on strike. It's all to do with the work culture in this country, which has been totally and utterly destroyed because the poor darlings are being asked to spend at least 4 days a week in the office. Wouldn't that be awful? Can you even imagine it? And so overwhelming numbers of the Public and Commercial Services Union have voted for strike action. I personally think we should just fire the lot and start again. But Colin Sutton, former senior investigating officer in the Met and a friend of this programme, what on earth is going on, Colin? Are they just scared of being in the office and working hard?
No, I don't think it's that. I mean, there's a number of things here. It's really interesting, isn't it? You've got the government doing the bidding for their union masters, I suppose, saying, oh, we'll roll back the changes the last government made with the civil service to try and get them back into the office. And then you've got local authorities and other organisations like the police, Metropolitan Police and other police forces saying, we want you back in. So we've now got two-tier public service, it seems, almost in some ways as well. But to me, I think the issue with the police very much is, you're probably aware that you just said there was police strikes many, many years ago, more than 100 years ago, and that resulted in 1919 in the Police Act, which made it illegal for police officers to strike. And that reason was because of the chaos and the lawlessness that ensued after the police strikes. Now, if we believe that the police service is such an important part of our ordinary, daily living and to make our lives go along properly, that we ought to forbid them to strike. And I agree with that. What we have to accept is that the police service today is a very different animal to that we had in 1919, for better or worse. We are now reliant upon thousands of these civilian staff to do real sort of important frontline jobs like call handling and control room work and crime scene investigation. Now, you can't do that from home, but also you can't run a police force if you haven't got those people in and they're striking. So perhaps the issue is that those people shouldn't be allowed to strike either. That law which stops warranted officers from striking should apply to other people who work in that service, which we've deemed to be essential to our ordinary living. And there's an argument, I would say, that should extend to other public services as well, but that's a different argument. But the other thing that I think we need to take into account here is the fact that there are many roles that can be done from home in the police service. There's no doubt. But the fact is that since Mrs. May's cuts in 2010, when all these police buildings and police stations have been sold off, I don't think there's actually enough desk space if everybody came back.
Well, that is an interesting point. But your point about many being civilian staff, no, really interesting. Colin, clear as ever. Well, Colin says the trouble is that half the staff are civilians. They're not really police at all. And yet still, doesn't this, this just example of this idea that's taken root since lockdown, that you kind of just do what you want?
Well, I think the issue from working from home, and both Jacob, who I know will be appearing later, and I had to deal with this in the government department, in the Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy department. And I remember they wanted to work for 2 days a week in the office. And I said, look, we've got to do at least 3. But, I was portrayed as a Neanderthal because I wanted them to at least to do 3 days in the office. And I think it's not their fault. It's just that the climate which they were used to, they'd grown used to, was one in which working from home is almost the default in many professions, which is completely crazy.
Well, I think it is. And yet this government, Matthew, you know, Starmer has talked about, you know, we don't need to encourage the culture of presenteeism.
Yeah.
And it's 4-day week, fine, and let it all hang out and work like... I mean, is it any wonder we're getting poorer?
I think that's part of the reason why people are wanting to work at home. I think what people have realised is they don't have to pay for the commute anymore. The cost of living is a rate that we've not seen for many years, and people are going, well, I can't maybe afford to go.
But the problem with it is that in the old days, you learned on the job by talking to more experienced people.
You still do.
And that's how you learn.
You still do.
Yeah, and if you're a graduate and you're living with your friends in a house of multiple occupancy, and they're all doing different careers, you're not going to learn anything in a work environment.
Yeah, work from home is very unfair on young, ambitious people, as Marty says.
No, and I think there's a fair point. What I would say is, as someone that didn't really mind going into the office, and actually part of my role in Westminster was obviously to be present.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is there's a class element to this, because when I used to make pizzas whilst I was at university, I wouldn't have had the option to work from home.
That's exactly
which is
right.
why I think a lot of these that are going on strike won't find sympathy
But when I was
in the country.
Secretary of State, you could see, because we'd have Zoom calls, and of course the senior people would be in their barns in Kent, and you could see on the Zoom that they had lovely libraries and lovely places to work. But of course the younger people were on the edge of a kitchen table with a whole bunch of people, screaming. It wasn't a comfortable environment. And so for older people who are more advanced in their careers, you can see why working from home is quite
Can I
attractive.
ask you both, though, just as a point of interest, what the trade unions would say is, well, what we're finding is our staff are just as productive, or whether you can measure it at home. But if they were, how would you both feel
I think
about
there are certain jobs, like being a computer programmer, where actually the last thing you need is a noisy, chatty office.
That's right.
But I think most human beings work better in teams.
That's right.
They actually gain energy.
And there
from
were
each
other
other.
jobs.
And there's a social dimension to work as well, which makes it even more
And
enjoyable.
there were other jobs, like, a lot of, on this, I remember speaking to not only James Dyson, but a lot of people in the engineering, manufacturing world. And you can't do that working from home.
No.
All the ideas, all the different bits of the system have to work together. And the only way you can work out whether your bit that you've designed fits in with someone else's is by actually being physically present in the same place.
Well, it had to knock on businesses as well, because there was this running joke online that during the pandemic, places like Pret would shut. You're not having the commuters coming in. Well, there's a serious point to that, because since the deindustrialisation of this country from the 1980s onwards, we are, I think it's an 89% service-based economy.
That's right.
So if we're not going to work and feeding those services, what are our town centres and city centres are bare half of the time. Just walk down Oxford Street.
But there are service businesses like architectural businesses or engineering businesses, which you can't, I'm sorry, do
I just fear
at home.
My fear is all the talk of work from home, all the talk of 4-day weeks, all the talk of work-life balance is frankly an attack on the culture of work and on the culture of success. And I think the Chinese must be looking at us and just laughing their socks off. Thank you for joining me this evening. Now, if you think I'm old-fashioned about turning up in the office, you want to have a think about our next presenter, mill owner Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Absolutely. Well, it always struck me, why do people always want to work from home on Mondays and Fridays? It's because they want a long weekend. It's idling from home. It is not working from home. And there has been a collapse in public sector productivity since 2019.
Of 8.5%.
So the facts are there.
Yeah.
And the police should not go on strike.
Quickly, Jacob.
What am I going to talk about? Jury trials. That they're going to have Lord Leveson, Sir Brian Leveson, investigating jury trials. Well, he's the one who wanted to stop a free press. So he's gradually chipping away at all our freedoms.
I think we know where Jacob is going. Well, anyway, let's get the weather with Aidan McGivern, and we'll be followed by the mill owner.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there. The weather is turning increasingly gloomy across the UK with a lot of cloud, some mist, hill fog and drizzle. There will be a few clearer spots over the next 24 hours, mostly central and northern parts of mainland Scotland, but a number of cloud breaks are possible elsewhere, particularly western parts of the country. But otherwise, it's just an extensive sheet of low cloud that will cover the hills and bring misty conditions with, in places, some light rain and drizzle, especially for western Scotland and through some southern and eastern parts of England and Wales. Temperatures then holding up under that blanket of cloud, 5 or 6 Celsius by dawn in many places, although under some clearer spells across parts of Scotland, dipping to -3 to -6 degrees. Frost-free, generally speaking, across southern areas, although a few cloud breaks possible towards the southwest, and where that happens, temperatures will dip to 1 or 2 Celsius. Likewise for Northern Ireland, some brighter spells to begin the day away from those areas where we're covered by a lot of low cloud, mist, hill fog and drizzle. The clearest spot there for northeast mainland Scotland, but otherwise Scotland certainly cloudier compared with recent mornings, and as a result the frost more limited, although it is a gloomy start for most and it doesn't cheer up much into the afternoon. In fact, there's little change. There's still outbreaks of light rain and drizzle through some southern and western parts, and some more persistent rain coming into the northwest of Scotland by the end of the day because of a weather front that will be approaching from the Atlantic. Generally 5 to 7 degrees in the afternoon. That weather front crosses the country on Saturday as a weakening feature, and then we're back to showers coming in from the northwest, interspersed by sunny spells, and it will be a bright day across some eastern parts whilst we keep cloudier skies in the west. And later in the weekend, increasingly wet for Scotland, drier elsewhere, but milder across the board.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed boiler repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Imagine getting the call to tell you that you've won £50,000 in tax-free cash, our biggest cash prize of the year.
Oh my God.
That's a big surprise.
Oh my God. This is amazing.
Oh, in shock. That is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best